Good morning. This video has very interesting information about the changes that occur from childhood to adolescence. I mean, the changes that occur to teenagers during puberty. And this video is not only targeting teenagers to enable them to understand the changes that occur to them during this critical period of their life, but it's also targeting the parents because um, parents have to understand those changes that occur to their children in order to be able to handle that period of time or that period of their age in a healthy way so that they do not lose their children altogether. Understanding is very important because this difficult period of life is considered like a bump in the life of the kids and their parents. And we have selected the term brain breaks, and this title was selected on purpose because during this period of time, during puberty, emotions are more powerful than logical thinking. Um, and this is the norm. This is not something abnormal, but we have to understand it in order to be able to pass safely through that bump of life. We will understand over the coming slides what happens exactly during that period. So you see here the car, and it's a car that hasn't, it seems that the car hasn't any brakes. And what forced the car to stop was the tree or hitting a wall. So the message the presentation wants or the video wants to deliver is that use your brakes, use the car brakes before hitting the wall. Don't let the wall or the tree or the solid obstacle be your brakes because it would damage your car. But if you use your own brakes, your own car brakes before hitting the tree or the wall, your car would stay safe. So similarly, if we consider that we have very strong and powerful and uncontrollable emotions during puberty, then the brain would act as brakes for those feelings. And we should understand this and we should learn how to use those brakes to control our emotions before hitting the wall. And in real life, hitting the wall means suffering from a sad event or a sad incident in our life. Sometimes during puberty, what is very characteristic is that children or teenagers actually during their transfer from childhood to adolescence and then to adulthood are very eager to try several things that are usually done by adults or grown up people. And this is what we call a premature act, trying everything earlier than normal. Those premature acts are sometimes damaging to your journey in the life. And this is very similar to a high RPM in your car. The RPM, this arrow points to your RPM, and the number of turns per minute that the motor does shouldn't be very high at the beginning. Because if you have a high RPM, this means what? This means that you are increasing your velocity in a very short period of time. Or in other words, this means that you're accelerating very rapidly. And this very rapid acceleration is harmful to your car motor. And therefore, similarly, during your life journey, if you try to do things prematurely before being ready to do them, then you would suffer and you would damage your life. So the car model is a simulation. The car without brakes is a simulation of a brain um, where the parts responsible for emotions become mature before the parts responsible for wisdom and logical thinking. And this is what we're going to discuss during our video. So a car without brakes will definitely crash or hit the wall. So you have to use your car brakes before hitting the wall. And similarly, you have to use your brain brakes during your life in order to be able to control your emotional reactions. So the higher centers in your brain that are responsible for wisdom will act like brakes for your enthusiasm, for your emotions, very strong emotions. And the purpose is not to hit the wall. The purpose is not to have trouble. Um, the limbic system is a part of your central nervous system, and more specifically, a part of your brain that is considered the crazy driver. Why? Because the limbic system is responsible for very strong emotions, for your impulsiveness, for your extreme enthusiasm that might make you hit the wall and face difficulties and issues in your life. So the limbic system is very similar to an accelerator because it's all emotions. So you feel your emotions accelerating, you feel your heart rate accelerating, your blood pressure increasing, and you feel that you have extra power and energy. And that extra power and energy is what gives you the enthusiasm to do things prematurely, or that gives you the trigger to have very strong feelings that might lead to acts that are uncalculated and that might drive you to problems in your life. This limbic system that is considered a crazy driver in this period of your life, which is the period of puberty, consists anatomically of three parts in the brain: the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. And we're going to see their location in the brain. So here you can see the one of the two. Of course, this is a lateral view of the brain. You can see one cerebral hemisphere because we are making a section in the brain. And here you can see the brain stem in between the in between the cerebral hemisphere and in between the brain stem, you can see the limbic system. And the limbic system consists of several parts, but the most important parts are the hypothalamus. You can see the thalamus here, but underneath you can see here this brown part, which is the hypothalamus. You can also see the hippocampus, and you can see two rounded structures. You see only one of them here at the tip of the hippocampus. That is called the amygdala. So, are you emotionally unstable? Yes, during puberty, yes, because of this limbic system that becomes all of a sudden, and because of the hormonal surge, becomes overactivated. So, what happens actually during puberty? That there is a sudden rise or surge in the estrogen hormone if you are a female, and in testosterone if you are a male, and they bind, as usual, like any hormones, to specific receptors that are specific to those steroid hormones. And these receptors lie inside the tissues and the organs of the limbic system. When those hormones bind to receptors in the cells of the limbic system, they do not only stimulate sex drive or sexual drive as expected, but they also increase the emotional volatility and impulsivity. By impulsivity, we mean that we decide, we make very rapid decisions, or even make decisions without thinking at all. Emotional volatility means almost the same, because volatility is a noun that describes liquids that evaporate rapidly. So you change all of a sudden from just like the volatile liquids change from liquid to vapor in a very short period of time, you change your feelings over a very short period of time. You might go from an extreme to another extreme. You might go from extreme happiness to extreme sadness. During that period, also during puberty, we also, or scientists also found that there were changes in the brain's reward sensitivity. What do we mean by the brain's reward sensitivity? Reward means giving a gift or giving something good in exchange to something good you have done. So the brain's reward sensitivity, we all have this reward, love of reward. We all like to be appreciated and rewarded. But the sensitivity for rewarding becomes very high in case of puberty, meaning that this means two things. This means that the teenager is very eager to get rewards from from the family, from the friends, from the teachers, and at the same time he is very emotional towards those rewards, which means that if he gets them or if they get them, they become extremely happy, and if they don't get them, they become extremely sad. And the presence of family members and especially friends and teenagers around makes them try to do acts to please their peers, and therefore it's a trigger for them to get more and more reward. Here we can see that even the hormone testosterone, that is usually the predominant hormone in males, is metabolized even in the body of females to estradiol, which is one of the derivatives of the female hormones, and they are both sex hormones, by the way. And estradiol binds to specific estradiol alpha receptors on the cell membrane, although they are receptors to steroid hormones, but these receptors in particular are present on the cell membrane, and they affect the masculinization of the morphology or morphological masculinization, which means that they are responsible for the physical changes in the child that make him or that make in the children that make them look more or less like adults. And they help developing what we call the male type neural network, because you know that the males in general think and react in a different way. They do not think and react the same way as females. This is due to the organization of the neural networks in the males. So we say that we have a male type neural network and a female type neural network. The male type neural network, if not well controlled, will lead to the sexual behavior that is characteristic of males and an aggressive behavior, meaning that if the norm of the male type neural network is not modified by learning, then there will be exaggerated sexual behavior or desire, and there would be an aggressive behavior. So this is the norm in males unless it is like tamed and by education. So it's not only estradiol and the estradiol receptors that cause this, but even when adulthood comes, there is more and more activation of the steroid hormones. And we have also the cells of the amygdala. The amygdala is, and this is where exactly estradiol binds, or where it binds the most. It binds in the amygdala, and the amygdala is one component of the limbic system that is responsible for aggressive behavior. In experimental animals, if the amygdala is stimulated, the sexual activity of the animal increases and the behavior of the animal becomes more aggressive. And on the other hand, if the amygdala is removed or damaged, the animal loses, or the animals lose their sexual desire and they become tamed and non-aggressive at all and lose even the normal reflexes that they had before. So as we have just said, testosterone is converted to estradiol even in males via an enzyme that is called aromatase enzyme. And the conversion of testosterone to estradiol in the amygdala has been explained on the previous slide, but in general, the conversion of testosterone to estradiol is important for several reasons, because you know that this form of female hormones, which is the estradiol, is important for normal organ development. We usually say that there is no living organism on earth or no living human being on earth who does not have an X chromosome, because X chromosomes not only determine the sex, but they have other genes that are not related to sex and that determine the development or control the development of organs. So estradiol is important for normal brain development and function, for normalization of bone density, and for sexual health, partly by normal development of the sexual organs. And the normal levels of estradiol in the male do not cause feminization, because it's not all the testosterone that is converted to estradiol, but part of it is converted to estradiol. The limbic system is also, we have said that the limbic system again consists of the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, and it is considered a border system because it lies between the cerebral hemisphere above and the brain stem below. So it's borderline or on the margin between the two. The limbic system as a whole, if we consider the three together, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, coordinate emotions such as fear and aggression. And we will see how they coordinate this. Let's say for the moment being that they control fear. They are responsible for creating this sense of fear inside you. And that sense of fear is created in a way that is protective to you. Because if you see a lion, for example, and you don't get afraid, then you might go and try to play with the lion. So this would be harmful. So in human beings, there is a high degree of parenting, and therefore the parents warn their children. But if a child does not fear a lion or a dangerous animal, then they would risk their life. They also are responsible for coordinating aggression, and we mean here coordinating with the stimulus, coordinating aggression with the proper stimulus. Meaning that when there is an aggressive stimulus, then you have to be aggressive or to respond in an aggressive form in order to protect yourself or escape, but you have to do something about it. So they control fear, they coordinate fear and aggression with the proper stimuli. And they're also responsible for the basic drives, such as hunger and sex. When I say that when you fear, when you face aggressiveness, you have to respond by being aggressive. This usually happens in the world of animals and sometimes in the world of human beings, just to protect their lives. But otherwise, if aggression is away from you, then you wouldn't ask or you wouldn't respond by being aggressive. The formation of episodic memories. And the episodic memories are the memories that are very specific, very clear in which you recall, they are remote memories, of course, memories from the past that are very specific, that are very clear, where you can recall everything. You can recall the persons, the location, the time, the colors, and everything. They are very vivid memories. The hippocampus in particular, which we call the seahorse because of the shape, processes conscious episodic memories. And we will see on the following slides what the verb processes means, because here in the nervous system, processing has a very special meaning for the memories. You have to understand first, you have to store the memory, you have to be able to retrieve it once again, and so on. And the hippocampus, together with the amygdala, help together forming emotionally charged memories. There are certain memories in your life that, when remembered, give you a strong feeling of grief, or a strong feeling of happiness, or a strong feeling of grief. So strong that you feel as if you were living at the time when this memory happened. So the hippocampus is not only responsible for processing the episodic memories, but for charging them with feelings, or for helping you recruit those and re-feel those feelings if they were present at the time. The amygdala, on the other hand, we have two almond-shaped bodies, and they are actually neural clusters of nerve cells, and they help process the emotions. And we will see again what process means. But processing which type of emotions? In particular, two types of emotions: fear and aggression. So this slide shows you the definition of an episodic memory. What is an episodic memory? An episodic memory is a type of long-term remote memory from the past. It's a very explicit memory, where you can see all the details, and it allows you to consciously live the memory, to consciously recall every specific detail of this personal experience or event or situation from the past. So it acts like an autobiographical time machine. Why do we say that it's an autobiography? Because it's recalling your life. You're retrieving your life memories. And it's a time machine because it carries you backward in the past. But all this happens in your brain and in your thinking. That's why in your memory centers, that's why we call it a mental time machine. And this episodic memory will tell you, or will recall, an answer to all these questions: what happened, where it happened, when it happened. And in addition to this, the hippocampus and the amygdala help you refeel or recall the emotions that were associated with this event. So what is processing conscious memories? The episodic memories, or the conscious memories, are also called explicit memories or declarative memories, for all the reasons we have said before, because of all the details you get when retrieving those memories. And the process of processing itself is here more understood. Processing includes three main steps. The first one is, first of all, the number one occurs at the moment when the event occurred, paying attention to the information, and then storing it in your brain, and then bringing it back on purpose. So the process of processing starts long ago, when you started living this remote experience, and then you focused. Because if you don't focus on what's happening, then your hippocampus and your amygdala wouldn't store the information. But after paying attention, because paying attention will stimulate your nerve cells, you will store this in your brain through specific neural circuits that we will see very soon. And then, in a way or another, you will be capable of retrieving them on purpose. And this helps you feel as if you were actively thinking about the memory. For example, I sometimes decide that I want to retrieve my memories when I was in the high school, for example. So I start retrieving the memory. It is as if I am thinking about the events that occurred when I was present in the high school. And so this processing helps you organize your memories, think about them whenever you need, and use only those past events that you want to remember. So it's really genial how the brain can, when you decide that you want to retrieve something from the remote memory, the brain brings it exactly with the colors, with the sounds, with the feelings that were felt at the moment. So, as we said before, the amygdalas are responsible for aggressiveness when stimulated and being tame and non-aggressive when they are removed. So, as we have just said, they are two almond-shaped masses present on either side of the thalamus at the lower end of the hippocampus. If they are stimulated, they cause aggression, and if they are removed, the animals becomes very tame and no longer responds to things that were previously very strong stimuli to the animal. So aggressiveness is not just anger, it's more than anger. It's being angry and trying to do something harmful to another living organism. But when it is removed, the animal becomes totally indifferent, not only indifferent to aggressiveness, but also indifferent to sexual stimuli. Here we can see the amygdala at the end of the hippocampus. Here we can see the hippocampus, and here is the thalamus, and the hypothalamus is underneath the thalamus. And now we are going to talk about impulsiveness during adolescence and during puberty. And as we said before, and as we started our video, we were talking about premature acts, about being driven by our feelings and being too enthusiastic to do things. And this is impulsiveness. So the problem is that the change from childhood to puberty and adolescence usually comes insidiously and gradually, but at the very beginning, the parents are not really aware of those changes or are not really anxious about these changes, let's say, because they do not have serious consequences. Parents start to be concerned only when these physical changes, like appearing of a very light beard on the face or a very light mustache or deepening of the voice in males or appearance of the breast in females, all this can be omitted or ignored by the patients if it does not lead to changes in behavior. But once this starts, impulsiveness, like acting in an irrational, unwise way, or even sometimes in a dangerous way, of course, because impulsiveness and lack of rationality would definitely lead to dangerous acts. At this moment, the parents start to be very anxious about their children. Sometimes teenagers are so immature and are so impulsive and take or make irrational decisions to the extent that they give you the impression that they do not think at all before making decisions, or They think, but they do not fully consider all the panorama of consequences that might result from their uncalculated acts. But we have to understand that this doesn't mean that adolescents do not understand well or do not know how to make decisions. But the fact is that they are still in a stage of their life where they think in a different way, solve their problems in a different way, and make decisions in a different way. It is a different way, but this doesn't mean that it is always a harmful way. But sometimes it becomes harmful because their emotions override their wisdom. So the biological explanation for this apparently weird way of thinking or irrationality is that, as we said before, um, the wisdom centers in their brains, like the prefrontal cortex, for example, and the higher brain centers, they continue to mature and develop during childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, meaning that although their emotions start to be very powerful and strong at the beginning of puberty and throughout adolescence, yet the full maturity of the brain is completed during adulthood. So there is a gap between the early development of emotions and the rather later or delayed development of the wisdom centers in the brain. As we have just said, that the scientists have defined a very specific region in the brain, the amygdala, responsible for immediate impulsive reactions of fear and aggressiveness. And they said that this region develops very early. Later on, after a certain gap, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, the frontal cortex, which is the area of the brain in the front, the area of the cerebral hemispheres in the front part, will develop. And those teenagers that were full of emotions, that were impulsive and rather irrational from the point of view of adults, will start reasoning, will start thinking before they act. So it's a matter of time. And the role of the parents here is to understand first and to accept those changes and to try to explain those changes to their kids, because understanding is very important. Sometimes the kids get scared when they suffer from those rapid changes that occur in their bodies, both physical changes and emotional or psychological changes. And if they get scared, they start reacting in a more unhealthy way. So if the parents are understanding, they will make their kids understand. The parents would become more patient towards their kids, more accepting and more considerate and more flexible. When strong emotions are associated with the development of the frontal cortex, this is the optimum, because in adulthood and in young people in general, what characterizes them is the strong neural connections between the nerve cells. Those strong connections and the rapidity with which the electrical impulses will be transferred from one cell to another help rapid thinking, rapid resolution or resolving of problems, and making decisions in a more rapid and efficient way. With time, the myelin sheath, the fatty sheath, forms around the axons, as you know, and this will result in a more coordinated behavior, more coordinated thoughts and actions. As we said before, we are repeating this because this is very important. Adolescents' brains work very differently than adults' brains in making decisions and in solving problems. What guides adolescents or adolescents in general is rather emotions and a very reactive amygdala, which is responsible for both the sexual drive and the and aggression. And that's why we might find this triad in adolescence: strong emotions, strong uncontrollable sexual desire, tendency for aggressiveness towards their parents, aggressiveness towards their peers, towards their teachers, towards people in the street. And they do not give themselves time to reflect on things and to let their frontal cortex work, simply because the frontal cortex is not yet well developed. What adds to the harm during this period of adolescence? This doesn't mean that they're not smart. Some of them are extremely smart, because those are the future leaders and the future decision makers in the society. But we are talking about that period of adolescence. And if they are, in addition to all this, they abuse alcohol intake or drug intake, of course, this would harm their decisions more and more. Another problem, because of this lack of thoughtful, logical frontal cortex function, they might misread or misinterpret social cues. And that's why they might get into trouble with their teachers, with their classmates, with their parents, because they might misinterpret facial expression. They might misinterpret a comment, etc. So if we add to all this enthusiasm, impulsiveness, irrationality, lack of optimum function of the decision-making centers, then they would fall into trouble. This is the prefrontal cortex in adolescent brains and adult brains. When it is fully functioning, then more wisdom and more logic is added to the life of the adolescent. The problem during puberty is that, and during in teenagers, the problem is that the battle begins within, inside the brain and inside the body. It all starts with a hormonal surge during puberty, which means a sudden rise in the level of female and male sex hormones. So the amygdala will grow in size. First thing to grow in size. And as we know, the amygdala is responsible for emotional lability, for aggressiveness, for uncontrollable sexual desire. But later on, so there is a battle inside, especially if the culture of the teenager is a strict culture. So the teenager starts to feel guilty because he has a strong sexual desire. He has very strong emotions and feelings. He feels that he is becoming aggressive. And if he hasn't read about this or heard about this before, he would feel scared, or he would feel guilty, or even they might try to end their lives because they get depressed and scared. So in such a case, in order to avoid this, we have to prepare them. We have to prepare them and make them understand that these are normal feelings and changes, and that they shouldn't feel guilty. This is a normal development in their lives that happens to everyone, and that they just have to learn how to handle these feelings. And later on, the parents and the teenager both feel that there is an improvement. And that improvement is because of the gradual development of the prefrontal cortex that acts like a chaperone, a regulator for the amygdala in order to ensure correct social behavior, in order to prevent the teenager from doing anything that can make him guilty afterward. So let's give a picture of adolescent behavior, or in particular teenager behavior, because adolescence is actually after puberty and before adulthood. They easily get involved in fights. Of course, this is like a direct application of what we've just said. They engage in dangerous or risky behavior sometimes, even without telling anybody. They make their decisions on their own. They are less likely to think before they act or pause. We have to pause before making any decision to make sure that our decision is not harmful to us or harmful to other people. We have to pause to consider our behavior and see whether this behavior is dangerous, inappropriate, unacceptable. They are less likely to do all this. Why don't they pause? They do not pause because they are impulsive. And why are they impulsive? Because they have a well-developed amygdala that developed before the prefrontal cortex. As I said before, this doesn't mean that they cannot make good decisions. They could be able to make good decisions, of course, if they give themselves the opportunity to pause and to think about the consequences of their acts. And therefore, parents, I'm not talking about the legal point of view, but from the side of the parents, we are telling them this doesn't mean that you tell your kids that, or you feel that your kids shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. If you have a teenager who is 15 years old or 16 years old, the problem is not that he is too young to be held responsible for its actions, but the problem is that he didn't learn, or they didn't learn how to pause and reflect on their acts and on the consequences of their acts. So the role of the parents, of the teachers, of the advocates, the policymakers is very important in understanding this behavior of adolescents, anticipating it. One of the major problems in families is that the parents are not aware enough to be able to anticipate the behavior of their kids. So they get surprised, they get angry, the reactions of the parents themselves become more harmful than the behavior of the adolescent. Here we can see how the brain matures and what are the factors that help maturation of the brain in adolescence. There are certain factors, many factors that affect this, and therefore people do not mature, or their brains does not mature at the same time. We have heredity, of course, the genes, the environment. Of course, there are parents who talk with their kids, other parents that do not talk with their kids. We also have age. Maturity is usually between 10 and 25 years. And here we mean the full development. So 10 is very early, of course. By the age of 25, the prefrontal cortex has been normally fully developed. Drug abuse, like nicotine in cigarettes, like caffeine in coffee and alcohol, all this affects the rate with which the brain gets mature. Medications, pharmacotherapy, prenatal insults or postnatal insults, lack of oxygen during pregnancy or lack of oxygen during childbirth, etc. The nutritional status, of course, nutrition affects every cell in the body and affects mostly the cells that are metabolically active. Adequate sleep is very important because during sleep, there is renewal of cells, removal of toxins, etc., strengthening of memories. Surgical interventions, of course, can affect maturation of the brain, even if they're not surgery to the brain, because surgery is associated with anesthesia and therefore with all the risks of hypoxia and dangers of anesthesia. The physical status, of course, the body built, the finances, the economical status, the psychological status. Is the teenager depressed? Does he suffer from any psychological diseases, etc.? And of course, the level of the stress hormone. So if the teenagers ask themselves, why are we so emotional? It's because of the high hormone levels. And in particular, in males, the high testosterone level increases the aggressiveness Whereas, on the other hand, the hormone that antagonizes testosterone in this field is cortisol. If you increase the cortisol concentration in an experimental animal, or if a person intakes cortisone as a treatment, cortisone, high doses of cortisone in particular, will make the person more submissive. And being submissive is the opposite of being aggressive. That's why in the body of the male, there should be that balance between cortisone and testosterone. In this part of the video, we are going to talk about another emotional lability or instability, but that does not occur in teenagers, that occurs in menopausal females after the cessation of menstruations. The hormonal changes, the withdrawal of the sex hormones from the female at menopause is directly related, or has been proved to be directly related, to the mood swings that occur during menopause. And the hormone that affects the females, the menopausal females in particular, is estrogen. So the withdrawal of estrogen in particular during at the beginning of menopause or cessation of menstruation results in fatigue. The female becomes easily fatigued, she becomes easily irritable, and she suffers or complains of difficulty focusing and concentration. One explanation for this is that after cessation of menstruation, both estrogen and progesterone drop. The estrogen, in particular, affects the way with which the body handles two important hormones and neurotransmitters, which are serotonin and norepinephrine. And this disturbance in the balance of serotonin, which is serotonin is and both serotonin and norepinephrine are responsible for elevation of the mood. And I think that people with essential hypertension, this is just an observation. I have no scientific proof for this. I think that people with essential hypertension do not suffer usually from depression because they have high levels of epinephrine and norepinephrine. So when estrogen is withdrawn from the body, the levels of serotonin and norepinephrine drop, and the female might start suffering from depression. The other female hormones, which is progesterone, you know that there is a cyclic fluctuation of the levels of estrogen and progesterone during the menstrual cycle. And in this last paragraph, we are not talking about menopausal females, we are talking about females who are still menstruating. You know that progesterone rises in the blood in the second half of the cycle. So it appears after ovulation. Ovulation occurs mid-cycle, and progesterone rises in the blood after ovulation, while the estrogen is present mainly in the first 2 weeks of the cycle. During the first 2 weeks of the cycle, the female has high levels of estrogen, and this is good because estrogen lifts up the mood. Estrogen raises serotonin and norepinephrine and lifts up the mood. So the presence of estrogen has a broadly positive effect on mood because it increases serotonin. But what happens in the second half of the cycle is that progesterone is increased. When progesterone is increased in the second half of the cycle, it has a calming influence at the beginning because it starts rising. So it has a calming influence because it is metabolized in the body into allopregnanolone, which is a steroid, and that steroid acts in the brain as a neurotransmitter and stimulates receptors in the brain. So we call it a neurosteroid. So it's a steroid that acts in the brain as a neurotransmitter, and it binds with receptors called the GABA receptors, very famous receptors. It stimulates them. And when it stimulates the GABAergic receptors, it diminishes stress and promotes sleep. So during the first 2 weeks, estrogen is taking over, and this lifts up the mood. And then during the second half of the cycle, progesterone becomes secreted, and progesterone is there to like thicken the mucosa of the uterus. But meanwhile, part of it is metabolized in the body and stimulates the GABA receptors in the brain and diminishes stress and sleep, which are two very important factors, or two very important actions, actually, very relaxing. But we all know that progesterone drops at the end of the cycle, and this triggers irritability, the opposite, irritability, sadness, and low energy in the female. And that's why females during the 7 days of menstruation or the 5 days of menstruation are very irritable, all of a sudden, very sad, and have very low energy to do any effort. This is because of the drop in progesterone. So just like the hormones fluctuate in the menstrual cycle and throughout life, of course, between the fecundity period and menopause, and during the menstrual cycle between menses or the menstrual bleeding and the rest of the month, just like they do fluctuate, the females themselves have a fluctuating mood or mood swings. And people who are dealing with the females, like their husbands, like their dads, their friends, whatever, their kids, they have to understand this. But there are some paradoxical responses. Some females, when they have high progesterone, this stimulates anger and anxiety more than relaxation. We will stop here, and then we will continue our discussion of the brain breaks, of our feelings and our mood swings in the second part of the video. Thank you for watching, and if you like the video, click on like, share with your friends and colleagues, and write comments because your feedback is very important, and subscribe if you haven't already done. Thank you and bye.